Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Nested Healing Podcast. My name is Jess. I will be your host. And today, our topic is spirituality and moral injury through the lens of trauma. I want to welcome our wonderful guests, Adam, Kenneth, and Rosalind. So, I want to let them introduce themselves to you. So, let's start with Adam. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jess. Lovely to be here. My name is Adam Molyneux-Berry. I'm just saying the last name because people always ask me how that's pronounced. And I'm an integral leadership coach. I'm founder of the Integral Impact Institute, and I coach mission-driven leaders to thrive in complexity and their teams as well. And I advise change makers on how to amplify social impact. I also steward a global community of change makers called Mindfulness for Change Makers. So it's beautiful, beautiful miscreants all over the world doing amazing things and kind of connecting around mindfulness. And I steward a regenerative agriculture farm called Healing Creek Farms, where I'm calling from today, in Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And it's really a center for collective thriving. So it serves as a retreat space, a leadership school, a well-being space, all of that kind of stuff. And the last thing I'll say is I work in systemic change. So I'm a really big fan of kind of creating initiatives like NI2C, where we're doing something that is bigger than us, that connects to something bigger than us. And with that, I'm in.
Thank you very much. All right, Rosalind, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Roslyn Che. That's my last name. I'm an integral coach as well, and I'm also part of the faculty with NI2C for their repair program. So let's see. I'm quite many things. It's a bit hard to actually pinpoint. And I like to know myself as an inquirer because that's really, for me, the core of things and where I start. So I'm also a writer and a poet outside of coaching. Yeah, that's what's really alive right now, coaching and writing. And also going along my healing journey and bringing what I've learned out back again so that there is a cycle, a virtuous cycle going on. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. And last but not least, the wonderful, amazing Ken. Would you like to introduce?
You're building me up too much here. Okay, well, thank you, Jess. I'm Ken Richter. I'm a board certified psychiatrist and distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. I recently retired from the military, where I was in my last position. I was the director of mental health policy and oversight for the Office of Secretary of Defense, representing DoD outwardly as well as inwardly in terms of what we were doing across the mental health spectrum. Going back to my past a little bit, I've had 3 combat deployments. I was a Purple Heart recipient on my first deployment. This was prior to specializing in psychiatry, but I got to experience both the hardships of actually being wounded yourself, but also taking care of Marines and sailors in a combat zone who you'd come to know. So that was very challenging, and it allows me to have some real connection to what it's like to go through a lot of these various challenges. And I think that's enough for a start.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time and thank you for your service. Thank you all for being here. To open up the floor and kind of start this conversation and get it going, I guess my first question will be, I guess, how might trauma lead us to types of spirituality to allow us to transmute our trauma into gifts? Like, how can we take what we have been given to us and make it into something beautiful that we can give we can not necessarily give the pain to, but we can give the creativity to. If that makes sense.
Well, I would think the answer that comes to my mind is, I mean, I think you have hopefully you have increased empathy and relatability and credibility with people you're talking to, and understand that there's different faces of how people respond to trauma. But welcome anybody else's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I've been reflecting on kind of this question, and I think for me, the trauma I experienced, you know, a lot of my change making was in very kind of, I'd say, conflict zones. So, you know, during the Arab Spring, for example, and that kind of PTSD and the other traumas that I came into the world with, they really stripped down my identity. They really helped me kind of um, pare away all the things that are not really me. And in that process, I obviously through the trauma lost connection to meaning and actually connection to others. And in the rebuilding of that, it really helped me find myself much more firmly, like the me that's really authentic and not the one that I took myself to be more. And I think the other part for me, it's kind of like that scene in Star Wars where Luke, to become the Jedi, has to go into the cave and fight himself. So for me, that's the trauma process, like where I go into the cave and I have to fight all the assumptions I have about who I am and rebuild that identity in a really strong way so that I can come out feeling a lot more whole and more put together. So for me, trauma has been a beautiful and incredibly challenging path towards spirituality. And just to say, by spirituality, I don't necessarily mean God or religion. I'm talking more about something that connects me to the wider web of life, to something bigger than myself. Just for those listening who might be put off by that term, it doesn't necessarily mean, yeah, religion or God in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a good sub question would be like what is spirituality is for each of us. I guess we probably should have started there. But like to me it doesn't really coexist with religion. To me it's more about the spiritual experience of being a human being, of like if I strip away all of my physical form, what am I left? And like for me that's kind of what it is. And I've been in, thank you for sharing that, by the way. I also have gone through many traumatic situations and everything where it does break you down kind of, for at least my experience, to like kind of raw parts. And then from there it's like you get to, for my experience, like kind of transfigure into something I wish to be, like something that feels more true. So for me that's kind of my experience with it as well, which like is very similar, and I totally get where you're coming from.
As I hear how the conversation is going, I'm like a few keywords struck me as like connection to, for me it will be connection to ground, connection to meaning, and then also like the question is like what makes us human. Like when I hear, you know, Jess and Adam, you talk about like stripping down and then like what's left at the core, what's essential. Yeah, and it's reminding me of a recent conversation with a friend. We were talking about actually, I wonder if deep down in each of us there is a shadow side where that some of us may be afraid to even admit that being human can feel disappointing. And that for me, the so-called spiritual journey, if I call it, it's really coming to go through like, you know, the so-called traumatic experiences and fully accept and embrace this human life, this form, like being human form, because like part of the human life is to suffer, go through the different pain, like different experiences. And then as we start to work through and heal, we get to not only know like what is true in us, but also come to really see this life as a blessing, as much as some of us may think that some part may be a curse for now. Yeah.
Well, I can't compete with that answer, but I mean, certainly for me, it's just a simple answer is just a sense of connectedness with something greater than oneself.
Yeah, I think overall the term can be so broad and so simple at the same time. Um, and it's so individualized, like to each human experience. And um, like whatever we take on individually, it's very interesting to see how we all process it and how we all can help each other. Because I think that's something that I can also kind of pull from this is like we're all here to try to better other people, better ourselves, and we all want to help and like have good intention with it. And I think that's like one of the baselines of like what brings us all here. And I think it's very interesting hearing all of our different perspectives on such a similar goal. You know what I'm saying? Um, yeah.
Something that's coming to me, I have some mentors. I have a lot of mentors actually. Very grateful to have a lot of mentors and teachers. And one of my mentors is a couple, and they talk about knowing spirituality in the three persons. So the second person would be knowing spirituality through others. Like, what are the conversations I have that really kind of help me connect to something bigger than myself, or the partnerships, the work I do. And the third person perspective is like the universe. Like, how do I connect to, quote unquote, the universe, or, something that's out there that is maybe the unified field in some traditions, or consciousness, or it could be God for some people. And then the first person perspective is when I'm and it relates to something that Rosalind said. Like, this trauma work has been a gift because it's helped me be fully present at times. Not all the time, because that's not accessible to me to be fully present all the time. I wouldn't even pretend that for a second. But I have moments where I feel really present to what's happening right now, the phenomenological experience of this moment. And it's incredible. And that for me is as much spirituality as any of the other ways of knowing. Yeah, I don't know if that opens up anything for anyone, but it just felt like something useful to share.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it makes me think about the perspective of, if I see somebody having a meltdown in traffic and constantly changing lanes and all this kind of stuff, it's like, I'm thankful for some of the other things I've seen in life that make me realize that even if I'm going to be really late to a meeting or something, it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So I'm thankful for that.
Mhm.
For me, this kind of conversation, sorry, if Rosalind, if you have something, go ahead and jump in.
Right.
It kind of makes me think of I'm guessing most of you probably know who Besser von Folk is. Of his book, the oh my goodness, why
What
can't
he keeps the score?
I?
Uh-huh.
Um, and his work a lot of like kind of reminds me of Ken and kind of where you're from, which is like veterans and working with them and like the mental health and how important that is and helping them kind of work through a lot of trauma. And then also like on the other side of like him interacting with like people not only who have mental illness but also who are incredibly traumatized who just need help. um and like how the common thing that they kind of all had too was like a almost like a spirit, like a humanistic spirituality kind of connection where it's like all they wanted to do was be and feel human and be connected to. And at the end of the day, that's kind of one of the grand things that like humans, since we're such herd animals, we're such social creatures that we all kind of gravitate towards. So to me, that's kind of what comes into my mind a lot. And I'll let you guys jump off of there and like everything. But
That's a very good point. And just a sidebar on that is, although we don't necessarily need to be talking about it, you know, military trauma is not just combat trauma too. It's unfortunately there's a lot of what we're terming military sexual trauma, um, and so there's a lot of different ways people can be affected.
Yeah, on that note, when you're kind of both bringing in the body with Bessel van der Kolk's work, and that's really what I've come to understand more. Like I did a lot of therapy, and the talk therapy for me only worked to a certain extent, but I had to go into the body, which is one of the reasons I'm so grateful for New Ventures West and their kind of orientation to the somatic world. But it wasn't really until I started doing a lot more of the kind of somatic therapy, the body-based therapy, like somatic experiencing or core energetics, EMDR, focusing, in a relationship focusing, those kind of modalities, that I was able to really reach some of the parts that weren't accessible through kind of, talk therapy, and kind of lived in, especially the really early stuff, the pre-verbal trauma. It's just wasn't accessible to me personally through conversation. It had to be accessed through different modalities. So it's a big conversation that I have with a lot of the people that work in the same space, which is, so we're born into these systems and they all have stories that shape our world, but we also born into a body that has its kind of its stories too, and it's just not something we're really socialized into. It's kind of like the body's in the way of getting better for many people, as opposed to the body is the way, I'd be really curious to hear what Rosalind has to say on this, because I remember that you've got some experience in this space too, right?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I was following, and then what you just said, and yes, the body is the way. That really feels very true to me as well. And in terms of all the pre-verbal things, but I'll speak for myself. I mean, even like the cultural context. It's like once we are each born into the world, I would say like I'm born in the world. We are taken care because of the different traditions our culture bring. We are also taken care in different ways. Maybe like some will be like really wrapped up, really swaddled. And in some places I've heard about, like in Finland or things like that, the baby is just kept in the box of sorts for like the first few months. So that already shaped the body in a certain way. Like through generations, we carry different kind of, whether you call it trauma, but also the gifts, the resilience that comes in the body. Like that's what's coming up for me now. Yeah. And if I were to add on, so something was coming up, but I was trying to recall her name, so I couldn't speak up yet. Because I didn't want to mispronounce it. It's Catherine, I think Myss, Myss. So I've heard a talk from her before, and I love her description of how she said that, if we really see the whole of human race as one whole body, one living organism, it's like the fact that some places have like uproars, violence, and even wars. Like that's like having parts of our body having cancerous cells. We can't really say that, oh, that's them and we are here, but it affects. But the so-called light side of it, the positive light side, that's the shadow, that's the light, is that, which means every person, when we do, or we bring out our light, our positive being, the vibrations, it has an impact as well, even though we might not see it, it's not visible, but to the whole entire living organism, we are bringing light to the shadow as well. And it's like both darkness and light are actually one whole body, if that, yeah.
That's a great point. If you could say that exactly like you did on the podcast, that'll be great. No, but that's great. One other thing it made me think about is we're talking a little bit about resilience and post-traumatic growth and things like that. And I know we all know this, so forgive me for stating the obvious, but I think we just have to be careful that I know that that's something that some people have yet to achieve. So but I mean, I think that's the ultimate end state that you would hope to be out from these types of experiences.
Yeah, I can. I relate to that. I came out of, like I say, the Arab Spring and all that work with PTSD for about 10 years. I was just completely not aware why I was getting the kind of results I was in my life, why things weren't working out, why I felt that way. I tried so many different things, not successfully, and it was really very difficult to be in that state
Right.
for a prolonged period and not see progress. It kind of really takes the wind out of you.
Right.
So I hear you on that. Yeah, it's not like you kind of you try something and suddenly you're better and you're in that kind of post-traumatic growth phase. For me, it's been a process like peeling the onion, kind of just trying different things layer by layer until I get closer to kind of what's at the core. Do you know something I'm interested in around this conversation is, and the body part of it is this kind of study of epigenetics, like how genes record historic information and intergenerational trauma. I'm really curious about that. Like in my family, trauma was very evident in both sides of my family. And I have really experienced myself that part of my work has been to process some of that trauma, to like not hand those stories down to the next generation, to really kind of, do that work. And it has been incredibly difficult. And, I'm privileged to have had really good teachers. So I can't imagine what it's like for someone that doesn't even know they're experiencing PTSD or trauma, to try and get through this. Like it amazes me the resilience of people, people coming back from deployment, and it just amazes me the resilience of people in the absence of that kind of support and access to that information. Like I feel very lucky that we have access to that kind of information and support.
Indeed. It just makes me think about a former Navy psychiatrist. One of my predecessors, Dr. Bill Nash, was very much a champion of talking about moral injury, because originally the PTSD was in the DSM as, and I know it's a separate, they're not completely the same thing, but PTSD was listed as an anxiety disorder, and now in the DSM-5, it's listed as a trauma and stressor-related disorder. And so I'm thankful for all the people who've helped evolve the understanding. And one of the things he said was that he considers this moral injury as part of what it is to be human and what life is about. And I think that's our sort of dominant thinking right now is like we should all be happy all the time, and if we're not, what can we do about that? But I think he would argue, and many would too, that you can't have the light without the darkness, as was previously put.
Yeah, the villainization of negative emotions, I think, is really detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we do address them and we're able to make it almost more normalized, like through conversations like this, I think it's really good. I think there's something there to talk about on like how it's okay to be not okay always.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you really couldn't be just happy all the time, because you wouldn't have any perspective to know that you were happy.
Yeah, the tyranny of happiness. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to actually name you, Rosalind, and just say what you were saying, Ken, really reminds me of what Rosalind wrote about authenticity versus attachment. That kind of conversation. I don't know if this is a good time for you to bring that in, Rosalind, if you're interested, but just kind of
sure. I was going to bring in a bit of Dr. Gabor Mate's work as well. So I'm a student of his work, and I really appreciate the perspective or even the paradigm shift he's inviting us into. Like, he talks about, whether is it like depression, PTSD, not as a disorder, but a form of process. The body is running a process. The fact that, the life underwent very extreme, intense experiences and had to take on a certain strategy to survive. But after that, it's like putting on a warm coat in winter, and then after that, forgetting to take off that warm coat in summer. It continues to run, then it doesn't serve. But it started off as a process to help the organism survive or help the person survive. So I really appreciate how he doesn't look at it as like, oh, you got an illness now, like it's being tagged as like, okay, now you got this, you're labeled this, and then here's the prescription. So it's very like honoring, I find very sacred as well, honoring like the body or the life force in us to actually survive, run a process and make it through. Yeah. And the part about authenticity and attachment. So he also brought that out in his work, saying that like in the times we are in, actually maybe even 1 century ago, as little infants, we are kind of, in a sense, like our quote forced or put in a situation where we have to choose one or the other. Like there is your authenticity, like going for or moving towards what you really want, maybe throw a tantrum even for a toddler. But we are really intelligent beings as well. So we learn that, okay, if I do that, my mom will not like it. She might hit me or she might put me in a corner, things like that. And we can't afford to lose that attachment because compared to many other mammals or animals, we cannot survive until like we know we are a certain age old. Like nobody to feed us, nobody to change change our diapers or things like that. So we are actually so-called put in the situation where we then choose attachment and forego our authenticity. Yeah. So that's really the journey that I would say it's part of the human journey and coming to unlearn that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add something to what you're saying, Rosalind, which is another framework, the parts work framework. And that this has kind of been really useful for me in recovering from some of these things, right? So, with parts work, it's Jungian, and the idea is that we're made up of all these parts, right? So there's part of me that really wants to be connected to the people, my primary caretakers. And there's a part of me that wants to be authentic, that might be different to that. And there's kind of that little war between them, and there's a little bit of judgment there. And what I've found about parts work is it has really helped me soften my self view. So there's a part of me that wants to go to the gym, and there's a part of me that doesn't, and there's a part of me that has judgment on the one that doesn't, and they're all welcome, right? They're all welcome. They're all welcome to be here, and they're all okay, and none of them are better or worse. And it has really kind of that move towards self-compassion that I think is really important in this work, especially for the people I work with change makers, right? Change makers are so good at changing the world and so bad at taking care of themselves. I wonder if there's a story there, like, I have to make things better because there's something wrong with me. I don't know. Like it's just I have a question around that, but the ability to kind of just say, right, so that energy that I put towards making things better for others, if I can just you kind of refocus the beam onto me for a bit so that I can just accept what's actually here as being me and then work with that instead of kind of resisting it. It connects to something else you said about, this human experience and suffering. Like, I think for me, there's such a big distinction between pain and suffering. Like, pain is inevitable, that's going to happen. But suffering is when I resist what's happening. I can create so much more suffering in my life. And that has been my experience. When I have resisted the things that are happening a lot, I've created a lot of suffering for myself instead of just kind of, I don't know, welcoming that this is actually here and this is something I need to deal with and finding a gentler way to be with myself that doesn't have so much judgment, like kind of that super ego voice of the parents in it.
Yeah, it's beautiful you brought up self-compassion, and that I always love that distinction about suffering, that it's with resistance that suffering arises. Yeah. Yeah, I lost my train of thought there. That was something I wanted to. It's okay. It will come.
It'll come.
I like also the conversation of like we need pain to grow. Like not always like extreme pain, but like it's also what helps the human spirit kind of grow. And I wanted to kind of, if it's cool with everyone, kind of jump into moral injury and kind of what your guys' thoughts are about it. For me, I'm kind of more of an outsider when it comes to that kind of like thought process, I feel. Um, when this topic was brought up, for me, I was kind of a little more like curious. So I guess I kind of want to leave the floor to you guys on like from your point of view, what is moral injury? What creates what can it create? What creates it? I guess.
I can chime in a bit on that. Wow, I add on. So I'll add on the point that I wanted to add on first, and I will shift gears to moral injury. Yeah. So Adam was talking about like you were wondering if the people you talk about like thought that there was something wrong with themselves, like they don't bring the attention back to themselves. I find that when we lose touch with the authenticity, we lose touch with the inherent value. Like, what is this value of this life or this being that we are? And because as kids, our attention is just outside. We know we start to learn, or our views are shaped. Okay, the food is outside, care is outside, connection is outside, like the embrace is outside. Everything is outside. So of course, different children, we have different natural temperaments, and also as we approach our caregivers, we might learn different things. So what happens is that we then take on, okay, some of us might try to please our caregivers so that they will give us what we need. So that whole attention is just being, in a sense, conditioned to go upwards instead of inwards. It's but part of it is also a positive thing, because it's part of, like, being a collective is recognizing that we are a community, and if you are well, I will be well. Or like, I need you to be well to take care of me. So that's from the child's perspective. But as more like an adult, it's also like, okay, if seeing the whole community is well, it's like everybody gets to benefit. So that's a bit of that going on, I would say. And to moral injury, I come from the point of view, so if I teach like the loss of inherent value and authenticity, how it can look like. I will use my own personal example for it. So for example, one of the things that my mom taught me as a kid was that, I have to smile and be nice so people will like me. So there's a lot about like, oh, okay, people must like me so that I can be part of whatever group so I can survive. But in that sense, I actually go against, even when I don't feel safe with someone. Sometimes maybe the body instinctually just have a certain aversion, but I can't trust that. So I have to actually go close to someone that I feel really unsafe with and smile. But that's actually a self-betrayal. I lose touch with my own values. To me, that is also a sense of moral injury, because I lose my moral compass. Not so much in the bad and good, but to me, I see even like, the larger case where we talk about Stockholm syndrome. Why is it that some people in captivity end up siding with their so-called perpetrator? It's part of like losing touch with their own compass and doing what it takes to survive, but losing oneself in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, the literature talks about kind of three classes of moral, or three triggers for it. There's acts of commission, things that you did, versus acts of omission, which I've definitely seen a lot of people, patients tormented by that. And then just witnessing certain things. And I kind of think of that as, at least from my combat experience, just the cheapness of human life, in certain situations. It can be quite troubling, especially growing up in a situation where, life was very much valued and things like that.
Yeah, I think for me on this conversation, there's been a lot of addiction in my family and outside of my family, and I think that's a space where I see a lot of moral injury, where people might be behaving in ways that are really not authentic to who they are, but it's just, what they feel they have to do, even in at a nervous system level, to be okay. And a lot of the people that I've worked with who are now in recovery tell me about how the anonymous movement, like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous, and there's a whole, from what I understand, there's like thousands of these different programs. They are really a healing balm for people that have behaved in ways that they really feel has violated their moral code, and have found a way through some form of spiritual process, my understanding, to kind of come back to who they are in a way that's authentic and still integrates the things that they did, doesn't deny it or push it away or pretend it never happened, but kind of brings it in as something that, yeah, that too happened, and here I am, and I'm not that anymore. what I love about that is that then you go from that place of, oh my God, I've done this bad thing, to, yeah, I done that thing too, and I got through it, and I can help you do that too, which I think is so beautiful in that respect. And then from my own experience with moral injury, you know, some of the change making I've done at a systemic level when I was younger, I really led in a way that I just shudder when I think about how disintegrated a human being I was, like leading from in front, putting a lot of people in danger. I was burning out all the time. I was burning out my teams. It was almost like a badge of honor how burned out we were. It was like how amazing we were as entrepreneurs, which is terrible, terrible example. And just the amount of damage I did, not knowing better, that I would never do now. And when I look back, I still shudder, right? So there's still something in me that's like, oh God, I can't believe that I did that. And so it's still like no one died on my watch. It was amazing. It was a miracle that no one died. Nothing to do with anything. It wasn't to do with me. I can safely say that. But it's still with me in a sense, like it still lives with me, the fact that that happened. And even though I'm integrating it more and more over time, I still have that part of me that feels really sensitive to what I did and how I was. And I can also say the gift side of it is that the people that I work with, I really share that with them so that they don't end up doing what I did. Because I didn't get supported back when I was going through those things. And it's so important to me now that I support people that in a way that I wasn't supported. That's like such a big part of how I'm organized around my coaching of change makers. Like what are the things that I wish I had heard when I was younger, when I was doing that would have absolutely made my life better. And I think that's, from what I'm hearing, that's the gift that we all bring to the people that we're working with, which is like, hey, you don't have to go down these paths because I've been there. Which is kind of comes back to what you were saying, Rosalind, about, the interconnectedness of this all, right? Like by us doing the work, we're also supporting others in doing the work, which I think is a really powerful thing.
Like, what's very present right now? So I'm really touched by what we've woven, and also Ken, when you brought up about like cheap lives, I think you used that term. Yeah, I might not know fully like the combat view or like how things are there, but it also feel like, so I'm going a little personal here, but I think there is a question probably for everyone also, like just how do we even measure the value of a human life? So to give my own example, so I really struggled with this, like having to learn and fully know, of course I'm not there yet, like experience the value of a human life. So my mom took her own life. So during her wake, when she was lying in a coffin, and there was some, because of where the culture that I come from, the traditions, there were prayers, I think certain chanting and things like that was set up. But right when the so-called monk or priest back then know that like it was a so-called suicide case, there was quite a big hoo-ha. It's like suddenly they couldn't do certain things, they had to do different things because it was viewed as disrespectful act. It was like that whole like so-called, what landed on the young me back then was like 180-degree flip, like that life just suddenly reduced just because of how that life like ended its own. So yeah, it makes me wonder, just opening a question here, like just what's coming up in terms of like the value of a human life.
Sorry for your loss. Kind of what's coming up in my mind right now. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that. And I love you and appreciate you. Just like a little. Yeah, I think that was also kind of a question on my mind too, was like the difference in different individuals' values of a human life is kind of intriguing, I feel like, um, for me too. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I really hear you on the culture part too, Rosalind. Like, you know, being multicultural and having lived in many countries, I really am aware that in some cultures, human life is less, just feels like it's worth less than in others. You know, in some of the countries I've worked in, you know, you have 12 kids because a lot of them are going to die, and you need help with work, and it's just that's an orientation, I guess, right? And then in other cultures I've lived in, like the human life is the most valuable thing, more valuable than ecosystems, more valuable than, you know, than anything else. So it's a really big question. Not one I have an answer to, but it's just something I'm aware of. Also aware of the different times in my life where I have valued or not valued my life and the lives of others. Like what this brings to me is the one of the experiences I had processing trauma is that I had very little access to empathy for others. You know, whenever someone would complain about something that was going on in their lives, I'd be like, oh my God, you have no idea what I've been through. That's like a first world problem. Like that's not a problem. And it was almost impossible for me to connect with the fact that just because I don't think it's a big deal, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it as something humongous for them. And I think that's one of the I would say challenges of trauma and moral injury is that it's just very hard to connect with someone else's suffering when you're so much in your own suffering. Well, I'll speak for myself. Like it was very hard for me to connect with other people's suffering when I was in it myself. And that has been a lot of work to be able to come out of that and to see that just because someone else is experiencing something that in my world would be not a big deal, it might be everything for them at that time, and to really kind of see it in that way, to connect to the times that I've had something life-changing happening, and to kind of say, right, so they're going through something similar, even though I don't get it. It's been so much work for me. Somehow, for me, that connects to this kind of value question, right? How I assign value to things.
To tying in with Adam's first point there, one of the just a short vignette. When I was, I also deployed to Afghanistan, and I was at the NATO big hospital there in Kandahar, and our nurses and ICU nurses and our trauma nurses and all they saw all kinds of terrible things every day, but one of the things that affected them the absolute most was there was a incident where a raid went on in a village, and a child had his leg severely injured, and they brought him back to the hospital and ended up amputating the leg, and were doing a lot of other heroic levels of care. And the dad was just kind of quizzically stroking his beard and said, "I don't know why you're doing all this." And and everybody kind of misunderstood it to mean like something different than what he actually meant. What he actually meant was, I'm going to be leaving him at the gate when I leave because he's a liability for our village. And man, I mean, those nurses had seen some grisly things, but nothing compared to how that made them feel that a young boy was just going to be abandoned because he was no longer had value.
Mhm.
So that's very much a real thing. I think from my combat experience, it's interesting because I've been, I was 8 feet away from a mortar that came in to our position, and I was blown up. Luckily, I was wearing all my protective gear, so I was fortunate. But really much more what haunts me is uh, the people who I was providing medical care to, who I couldn't save, and things like that. That being blown up is small potatoes in my mind, to my some degree of guilt about that, even if it's unfair.
I really do appreciate that you guys feel open and um, comfortable enough to share that. Um, yeah, you guys are all amazing. Well, that's all I've heard. Y'all are amazing. So, from my point of view, I'm just like, you guys have gone so through. I can't speak English anymore. You guys are all so amazing, and you've been through so much, and I appreciate the wisdom you guys are sharing. um, with us. And yeah, all of your insights are incredible and everything. And
Just to add something to the conversation, I mean, previously I talked about how the categorization of PTSD had changed, but um, and this moral injury, I don't know if there's a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap, but it's not exactly the same thing. Um, but I'm thankful for us having this conversation, and I'm thankful for the fact that the field is evolving in its understanding of the complexities of the human reaction to trauma and all that various other ugliness in life. So just want to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I'm appreciating your really big heart, Jesse. Thank you so much for the way that you're kind of holding space for us. There's something that's coming up for me in our chat, which is around the spirituality part of the conversation. And it's so for anyone suffering from the effects of trauma right now, like I just want to share that I really understand what that's like. I've really lived it, and it felt like that's who I was. And today I don't feel that way. So the first thing is just to say that it's possible. And one of the spaces that really helped me get there was spirituality, and I don't mean that in a religious sense at all. Kind of like something that Rosalind mentioned about ritual. I'm a really big believer in the power of ritual, in having little things that help me organize around this human experience in a way that is useful. And I, as difficult as experiencing all these different types of trauma that I have, from broken attachment to PTSD to, both my parents dying of their addictions, really sadly. Really, it's been such a gift for all the people that I've been able to work with since then. And it feels really like, I don't know how to say this kind of clearly, but it feels to me like trauma is part of the way that the system sees itself and grows. The system of us as humanity. Like you were talking about interconnectedness. Rosalind, I think of Dr. Dan Siegel's work on interpersonal neurobiology, right? It is really, for me, it is really real that we are all interconnected, because everything is interconnected. We're all energy, and all systems, all living systems are interconnected. And for me, the journey from trauma to spirituality has been about increased resilience, a greater appreciation of life, way better relationships, a lot more compassion for others and for myself. A lot of strength has come out of it. Not the strength I used to think was strength back when I was leading, in a revolution, but the strength that I understand now, which is to be with what's here and to really try and be okay with that, which is so much more difficult than going into denial or judgment or blame on others, but to actually just really be with the experience. And it has just been so amazing for me personally that, there's that kind of Buddhist expression, I think what is it? No mud, no lotus kind of thing. And so there's something about the trauma and the PTSD being really rich, fertile soil for the me that I really am, and that I want to be, to kind of emerge and be stronger than ever and grounded in something that's in my own reality and in my own experience. There's something really beautiful about that. And so, yes, it's so easy for me to remember all the really challenging things that happen, but I also nowadays can see all the beautiful things that can happen. Like, for example, this conversation, being with you lovely people here, in a way that really, NI2C, the work that Jen is doing with NI2C, and you, Jesse, as well, there's something really beautiful about that kind of transmutation of heavy, challenging, difficult experience into something really beautiful that can benefit others and will continue to benefit others. It's like ripples, waves of just awesome stuff, awesome source coming out from these really challenging experiences. And for me, that's how I see our collective unfolding, life forward movement.
just to piggyback on the thankfulness concept. It's interesting. If we think about moral injury as being a part of life, um, if we could, cure it, would we really want to? And I think the answer is no, because it would mean that we were living in a world without any morality or empathy or compassion for our fellow human beings and things like that. So it's really a necessary, to my mind, part of our existence.
Yeah.
I kind of have two thoughts thinking about that. One, kind of picking off of what Adam was saying was, I think Rosalind, I was in repair. I've been a repair participant now, graduate, and Rosalind was my coach, and she was amazing and everything. And I'm very grateful for the work that we have done together. For me, I think she has been a big part of like my growth and healing and spiritual growth as a human being. So I do want to thank you for that. And also like kind of piggyback off of what Adam was saying, being like, yeah, it's possible to have growth. And as Kenneth was saying, it is a necessary evil, I feel like, to have. And also the way you're describing it, and saying like, would we want a world without it? It reminds me of a Doctor Who episode. I don't know if you guys watch Doctor Who, but it's the one. I think it's I don't remember which doctor is which, but it's the one where like they have like a little thing in their brain where they can like switch off their emotions so they can make good like programs and everything, and so they don't have to suffer and everything. And it kind of reminded me of that, of like where when they did switch on their emotions, they were like, oh, this is terrible, we don't want this. And how like it was, the pain is necessary. To what extent and like how bad some of the times it can be, maybe not, but I think overall, pain makes us grow as humans. It's what helps us evolve, it's what helps us become better. Um, in a different episode with Jason, and it has the most that needs to happen to be developed properly. And that's why at some points we seem like we make really immature like choices in the moment, but when we come down later the line, like we kind of can get embarrassed about it and stuff. But it does have like a lot of neuroplasticity and the ability to change. And I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaways is from this episode in general, is the human spirit is resilient, and we have the ability to change, we have the space to change, um to better ourselves. So that's my little tidbit.
And can I add something, Jess, which is, and we need each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, it has been such a gift to have the teachers that I've had supporting me in this journey, right? I think it's part of how we're wired, right? We are wired for connection, and we need each other for growth, right? Just to know that it's possible. Yeah.
Beautiful summary. And I'm adding on too. Yeah. And also re-emphasizing what you said, just that pain is necessary for growth. And that, Adam, you talk about spirituality and others. We need each other, those that have helped us along the way. For me, it's also, I see the process as coming back to trusting self, trusting the other, and trusting the greater universe, whether you may call it the divine or you may call it life itself, nature itself, but I see it as that the three relationships and coming to be in relationship with those three again. Yeah. Maybe another tipping point. Sometimes what we see, as in what we don't see, doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah.
That support is there. Like we have Jen and Desiree in the background. We're not seeing them, but the web of support is here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. I guess I'll start with the checkout question then, and we might keep going then. What is, I guess, like one spiritual activity, I would say, that we all kind of want to try out and like do? For me, it's yoga. I've never done yoga. I've done like small things in my house, but like gone to a yoga class, I've never done. And I want to do it someday. Do I know when that's going to be? Probably not soon. I'm very busy right now, but I feel like it would be fun.
Been on my bucket list for a long time too, but I never managed to fit it in, but I agree.
I've tried to do yoga, but I used to play rugby as a kid, so my hamstrings are so short. Yoga is basically torture. So I would love to love yoga, but the experience has been challenging. That's a great question, Jen. Jesse, I don't have an answer yet. I'll wait to see what Rosalind says.
uh, I, I don't know why this activity came up, but it did. So I've done that before in one class years ago, a retreat, but not ever since. And this idea is coming out to take a walk in the cemetery again. It was really very impactful and very touching, just looking at what was written or inscribed on each of them, and like the age even. Yeah, that's coming up. So yeah, I would put it up. Maybe I'm called to something. I don't know yet.
No, listen, I'm a big fan of walking in cemeteries. None of my family's buried in cemeteries, so I don't really have a reason to visit, but I would like to have a reason to visit. Because my family is also Hispanic, so we celebrate Dia de los Muertos, but we don't go to a cemetery to do the altars. We have them in our houses. So that's like another thing that like I would want to do too, is like go to cemetery, especially in October. Those are when they're the most pretty, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a spiritual practice I haven't done that I want to do because I'm quite curious. And so I generally end up doing what I want to try and do. I think the thing I'm really curious about now is more kind of shamanic or indigenous ways of working with trauma. I'm really curious about that. I've heard some amazing things about Maori practices around that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in, like my understanding is that the role of the shaman was to help people really connect with their environment in a way that made their tribe more effective. It's kind of connected to holistic science in a sense, and so I'm curious about that. I'd love to hear about how thousands of years of really careful paying attention to things like this have helped those traditions deal with trauma. Like there's a lot of indigenous practices I don't know about. The ones I've discovered are amazing, so I'd just like to find out more about that.
With all the distractions that we face with technology and the millions of ways we're being pinged on any given moment, it's accessing that sort of spiritual perspective, I think, is even on a basic level is a lot harder for people nowadays than it was maybe when we had less distractions. And so on a very basic level, just being able to center oneself and get into the moment is, I think, a very important beginning piece to that.
No, in fact, I have one more thing to say. Back to Adam's point, I also had like a curiosity about like shamanism and stuff, and I like at one point went back because I'm Armenian Mexican and like German and Dutch, so I'm like a weird hodgepodge that someone just slapped together. It's how I like to describe it. It sounds very brutal, but to me it sounds funny. And so I think overall for me, I did a lot of studying into like ancient paganism in Armenia because it's known as being like very Christian and one of the first like Christian states in the Middle East. Or I guess it's kind of Middle East. It's in a weird place. It's like that weird in between. Where it cusps kind of the everything. And for me, that was really healing. I think I found is just kind of like going into like my background and connecting with something that I'm not always connected with. So I think that's also there's a lot of like spirituality and like the sense of I can connect with my ancestry in a way that is probably unconventional. Well, thank you guys all for being here and everything and joining in, and thank you for your wise words of wisdom, and I greatly appreciate it.